Hello, my name is Frank Hopf. I'm with the Conserve Nassau nonprofit organization run by volunteers. Uh, we formed to help provide technical, educational, and other support to the Nassau County community as it addresses issues of growth management, improving our resiliency, and quality of life as we move forward. I am a professional engineer in the state of Texas. I have been for 37 years. And I also have a PhD in coastal geomorphology. Easy for you to say. What I'm trying to do here is share a screen and talk a little bit about an issue that was brought to our attention by a citizen. And it relates to the problem of flooding that was recorded on March 23rd of this year, 2023, along North Front Street. And concern raised by the citizen was, and concern we now share, is that this routine erosion we see is routine erosion is being indeed caused by routine flooding along this stretch of land. And this is the area we're talking about. It's north of Center Street, north of where Brett's parking lot is, up toward the port and downtown Fernandina Beach. And indeed, there was a flood, a very minor flood at the elevation 4 foot on March 23rd. This is the recording from the flood gauge, which is right behind where that picture was taken. And this is a 2-month image. And you can see that as you look at the 4 foot level where we start to see water overlapping onto the land during these high tides, we see that just about every full moon and new moon we either go over or start to approach those. The 2 month recording. And we can confirm that by visiting in the field. We did that on the 30th of March, and we found this rack that the vegetation, that dead vegetation that rolls up with the tide, either on the beach or on this case, this flooded piece of property. And where the high level is where the rack is left behind. So we're seeing we are indeed getting water and had water over the level there. And we go further up in this area that we're concerned about. The furthermost property is the Kavanaugh property, or one of the furthermost north. And again, we see the rack against the fence, the property fence, almost against the road up there on the north end. We also see a lot of additional breaches in the retaining wall that's there on the Olstein property on the south end. This new one, this is a new one around this pile where we've seen quite a bit of soil pulled away. It does not show in the 2021 aerial photography of the area. So this area is indeed being eroded by our tides. And we can see some of the bank erosion that's going on. And of course, this material gets washed off the land here. Not only are we losing land, valuable property, but it is being washed into the harbor, contributes to our silting problems, which have plagued the marina for quite some time. Not only do we get erosion from the water coming in and going with the tides, but it's apparent that the storm sewer is not adequate to handle all of the rainwater we occasionally see in this area. And indeed, there's evidence here that this inlet, which should be an inlet on the property, becomes an outlet as the storm sewer is overwhelmed by floodwaters, rainwaters, and is causing erosion as it exits the inlet and goes across these properties to get to the river, carrying soil and rock with them. So this is what our regular flooding, 4 foot flooding of the Olstein property looks like, the 4 foot high tide here. And if we were to go higher, which we occasionally do, either due to a minor nor'easter or whatever, we can see that at 5 foot, we're overflowing water onto Front Street and getting across Front Street and over into the property to the east. Going a little further north, we see the regular flooding, the 4-foot flooding, covers the city property that sits just in the middle of this area we're concerned with. Again, when we take a higher level, the 5-foot level, we go across the railroad tracks and get into the property on the west side, excuse me, the east side of Front Street. And further north, we get into a lesser flood, a little steeper bank there. As you can see, more has already been eaten away here. So this is kind of like the future of the properties to the south. We're very high, very limited amount of flooding during the 4-foot tide. But as we go further in water level, we again cross the street and cross the railroad tracks and cross our Front Street. And again, in this particular property I just showed, we don't have a heck of a lot of soil to lose before we start eating away at Front Street and the telephone lines, and then eventually the railroad tracks. A good storm could easily take out big chunks of Front Street and more. But what if we get more? How do we get? Happens when we get hit with more powerful storms? And this is a gauge from that very same gauge level in the marina, showing what happened back when Nicole went past us just this past November, 2022. And indeed, we went way past the 4-foot level many times during its passage, and indeed got over the 6-foot 1 or 2 or 3 level on the 10th of November. So what did that show? How did that flooding hit us? Well, if we get the 6-foot level like Nicole, we can see in the north end here water going back up almost to 2nd Street and lapping at many of the locations on the west side of Front Street. But interestingly, we have a flood wall we have built from about the boat dock south to the Petanque Court, and even though that's designed to protect us from a 9-foot flood, because we have not completed the flood wall to the north and to the south, our flood waters as we go over 6 foot, not unlike the waters at 5 foot, will actually flood to the south, flood the railroad tracks, start to flood the parking lots, start to flood up Center Street also. And it will continue further south till the point where it starts running into waters that are going around the flood wall from the south. How does this Nicole flood compare to what we should expect routinely, what FEMA does in their calculations of flood risk? Indeed, if we look at it, the Nicole flood was what we call a 30-year flood, according to FEMA, maybe a little bit more than a 30-year flood. So the 30-year flood is one that we should expect to happen on average every 30 years, or about a 3% chance of happening in a given year. Unfortunately, Nicole was preceded by a similar 30-year flood just 45 days before, and we've now had 4 of these since Matthew did it to us 7 years ago. So again, the probabilities are this isn't exact science. This is not a calendar kind of thing. It's just a probability, and we have to live with that fact. So we have to worry about higher floodwaters, because indeed bigger floods are potentially coming and have come in the past. And as we see higher waters, of course, we're going to see more property underwater. We go to the 6-foot level, as we talked about, we cross almost the 2nd Street. As we go to 7 foot, we're across 2nd Street on many areas. And again, the water will flow around our flood wall and head south and head up Center Street. And again, this whole concept that you need a complete flood wall to make a flood wall, the money we have spent will not already will until we complete the project will not be of any value. And again, further south it flows, so it runs in the water coming around from the south, and we've got pretty deep into town here. What if when we get that 100-year storm? And here we're showing, the 4 foot or the 6 foot, and then the 7 foot, go to 8 foot, and then 9 foot, and we have in town 4 to 5 foot of standing water under a 100-year storm. Almost all the downtown parking we've been talking about will be under 3 or 4 foot of water. And this is a conservative view of this thing. Typically, these kind of floodwaters will come with a tropical storm, which also typically come with a lot of wind that could create waves off of the river that would force more of this water further up into town, 4th and 5th Street. And then we're going to have a lot of rainfall typically, and that rainfall will have trouble coming off the land, being drained to the river, because the river's all plugged up and the drains are all plugged up with the floodwater already there. So it'll start to stack up. So this is a pretty conservative view of what would happen in a 100-year flood. And there have been reports of even lesser floods having water go much further to the west into town. And again, further south we go. Again, we're able to go further south because we don't have a flood wall there that's complete. And we can see this entire area being flooded. And one of the losses will, of course, be you'll have to swim to the oldest bar in Florida, unfortunately, once we get to the 100-year flood. And it will be a loss for a while. But even more frightening is that these floodwaters will go further south and again come in from the south. And pretty soon we're at the 100-year flood level, and City Hall has 1 to 2 feet of water in it. This is bad enough, but at current planning, City Hall would be the emergency control center during hurricane events, and this kind of water level would make it useless for that and disrupt the emergency response activities. And even historic Turginley properties will have waves lapping at their doors. Again, this is a conservative view, and there'll be wind-driven waves that will be pretty prominent out in that area. To make things even sadder for our erosion aspects, these waters that came in will have to go back out the same way they came. And as they erode on coming in, they'll even erode more as they drain back into the river. And all this stuff will have to flow back toward the same way it came over the properties whose erosion we're concerned about. And this concentration, because of the existing flood wall, which would actually make things worse, because it'll kind of concentrate water returning over the properties that we're seeing erosion on. So an event, big enough storm, 100-year storm, we could easily see like the old Fort San Carlos in Old Town, which was there in the 1820s. And now been washed away into the river. We could easily see Front Street and railroad tracks and part of downtown also be washed into the river forever in a 100-year storm. Talk a little bit about the 100-year storm. The last one to hit us was in 1898. We know that there have been 60 of them in the last 6,000 years of the history of the island as we know it. So it's just a matter of time. It's been 125 years since. Matter of time before we do get hit with that big of a storm. And unfortunately, until we can get this property protected by flood walls and flood walls to the south, we're gonna have problems. Now we've masked the problem a little bit by this dumping of construction debris on the waterfront. Not only does it make it one of the ugliest waterfronts I've seen, but it also probably is detrimental and will help accelerate the erosion of the uncompacted soil underneath it, and it will contribute to the demise of this property if we don't get the flood wall completed before the big one hits us. And so this is a little reminder of John Donne 400 years ago that when a flood hits one part of town, it affects us all in higher insurance rates and higher risk perception. And so it behooves us all to work hard to get this flood wall completed and in place. Thank you.